All right, so welcome. This time, I'm delving a little bit into GitHub Spec Kit. So, what this is a tool that's been created by the GitHub team that allows you to work with your favorite AI agent to plan out and work with applications. So, it's all about the design part of the process. Yeah, it can help you actually implement the code using AI agent as well, but it's mostly about designing the application, doing the requirements specifications, spec-driven development. Um, so what this tool is a set of scripts that they've created that can work with your favorite coding agent, and whether that's GitHub Copilot or whatever it might be that you're using, um, and your favorite development environment. And there's a wide variety of environments that are supported. So, for instance, here, if we look at supported AI agents, you can see there's a big long list of here of things that they do support. And the way that it works is it comes as a set of scripts, and there's two different versions of each script. One for PowerShell if you're working in a Windows environment, or one for Bash if you're working in Linux or Mac or whatever it might be, some other environment. And also, for each of these agents that it works with, there are two versions of those scripts. There's one for PowerShell, one for Bash. And it starts with the specify command. And I'll get through, the various commands here in a minute that you will need to set up and work with your application. But what we're going to do is kind of just walk through it as an example because the best way to see it is just to work through an example. And basically, that's what you do. So the first thing you'll actually need to install is a tool called UV. So UV is a package manager for Python scripts. It's like NPM, but it's for Python. So it allows you to install tools and libraries and packages and whatnot that are Python based. And there's two different versions there that you can do. There's one that you download and run the tool that you're going to be using, or the other one will let you actually execute the tool from its remote location. In this case, going to be the specify toolkit or spec kit directly from GitHub. So what we'll do here is we'll jump over to our let me minimize that and get that out of the way. All right, so I've got my command prompt here. Go to, whoops. All right, so we've got our empty directory here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use UVX here is the command to run, basically to pull it from a destination. In this particular case, we're going to pull it from our GitHub repo here, the spec kit repo. And it'll run a command called specify, which is what sets up your initial project. Now you can either create a project from scratch, in which case you would use the init command with a project name. And what it'll do is it'll create that. Or if you want to install it in an existing project, so say you have already got an application that you started, that you're working with, that you want to add the ability to work with it with SpecKit, then you would just do like dot. So it's just saying initialize it here in the current directory. And we'll just go ahead and leave that because we're just going to call it SpecKit demo. And what it will do is it will bring up a pop-up here. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to select your coding agent. In my particular case, I'm just going to use Copilot. And then, and as you can see, it'll automatically detect whether you're in PowerShell or Bash and kind of set that as the default. But I'm running from PowerShell, so I want to install the PowerShell scripts. And what it will do is it go down through here. Let me scroll back up here. So what it does is it runs through these various steps to initialize the project. You'll say, it'll give you some warnings, and it'll say you're already in a project directory, and you can start using commands. So if you want to run from the command line, you can run the commands here. I'm going to do it from Visual Studio Code because it's a little bit easier for me to show it that way. and it allows you to, especially if you're working with Copilot, it's a little bit easier to do it that way. But there are a number of commands that you'll do, and the very first thing you're going to do is the constitution, and we'll look at that here in a second. But first, we're going to do start Visual Studio Code in the current directory, and let me size that a bit here, and let's all right, do that. Yeah, move my gargantuan cranium out of the way here. All right, so we can, because we're going to be working with Copilot, so we want to be able to see everything on the right side here, and let's expand that out a bit, because this is going to be the conversation menu with Copilot is going to be where we're going to be focused here. So we're in this empty directory. You can see it has installed, or it has added a number of default structures here. See if I can enlarge that somewhat. Okay, so it's a little bit bigger font. Hopefully you can see that better now. So what it does is it creates several folders here. So we've got first the GitHub folder here, and here you can see it's installed a number of markdown files. And there are various things here, and we'll look at some of those here in a bit. But basically, these are just the details that it uses to work with your AI agents. But the biggest thing you want to understand here is the stuff in the specify folder. So the first file that it's going to work with is the constitution file, and we'll work this here. Right now, it's just a template. You can see it's an empty template, and it's got nothing in it here but some template stuff. There's a script folder where it installs some of the PowerShell scripts that it uses, and then template folders, again with template files. So the way that you work with it is you'll run various commands from here. The biggest ones to remember are the prompts here. It creates these prompts that you can then use in your agent. So you do /speckit.constitution is the first one that you're going to run. And basically what you're doing with constitution is you're defining the rules that your AI agent will live by. So you don't put anything in here about the application itself, about what you're trying to do. That comes later. You're establishing the principles on which the agent will work. So you're saying, okay, these are the rules that you have to live by. These are the rules that you don't break. If I were to open up an existing one here, an example from another file that I've created. Here's one that I have created from another one. So, there's various core principles that you define here. So there's like the code quality discipline, there's testing standards, and you mark these things kind of as non-negotiable. Say, hey, you've got to follow these rules. Again, testing is mandatory and layered. User experience, the UX delivers this. It's performant. You put in standards for performance, for messaging, for various things that you want when it actually designs and lays out what it's going to do as far as the tasks and actually implements those. These are the rules that it has to live by. You can do performance requirements. You can do various constraints. You can say, all the user experience has to be accessible. You can define accessibility requirements. You don't do anything as far as the application design here. The specific details, you don't say what kind of application you're doing. You don't define the technical requirements. This is not the place that you would define any of that. It does come up with some pretty good stuff on its own. So, for instance, if I were to say just run it without any details, close that one. So the first thing it's going to do is going to look at this template and workplace structure. I don't have anything here, so let's see what it comes up with all on its own here without any prompting, without any specifics. Again, it's saying I'm looking for documentation, doing for details, but there's nothing there. nothing about what the project is or the proper constitution. So it's just saying I can't find anything to infer from, so I'm just going to create a generic Spec Kit constitution based on this structure here. So I'll show you what it comes up with by default. It's usually pretty consistent with what it generates. You can depend on the AI agent that it's is using, of course. And of course, being an AI agent, it takes its good time to get anything. All right, here we go. Keep. Let's see, what did it come up with on its own? So it has this at the top, saying here's what I did. And so it starts, okay, I'm doing specification driven development, and it provides some details about that kind of stuff. Here's the stuff that I want to do. I want to do, each user story must be independently testable and deliverable. User stories must be prioritized. And it gives you a rationale for each of the decisions that it makes. And again, it's summarizing all this, of course, being Copilot. Test first driven development. So tests written before. So it does, red green test or red green development. So write the tests so that they'll fail, and then confirms that the tests fail, and then it will start implementing the features. And that's the way it'll do it. So it's doing test driven development here. Constitution compliance says every implementation plan must, so it'll check anything that it does against these constitution rules that you have created. Saying favors simple, clear solutions over clever or complex ones. And code must be written for humans first, computer second. So and on and on. So it gives you these set of rules that it does. Development standards, documentation requirements, naming convention, clarification protocol. So if something's unclear from the requirements, it'll flag it so that you can look at that and come back and update it and maybe provide more details for that or write it yourself. And of course, you can make any changes that you want to these files as you're going. So if I were to come in here, I could add my own step or my own requirements. I could add my own rules and have it handle all that. And it'll use all that going forward. So you can, this is a living, breathing document. It's not a create once and done with it. You can make changes. You can make additions. You can, remove things if you don't like how it's working out. So it's everything that you do with this is a living, breathing documentation. So the next step that you'll do, so you've got your constitution. So the next thing you want to do is kind of specify what the application is going to be. So we'll do speckit.specify. And what we're going to do here now is define what the application is. In this case, I am going to put stuff in here. So we are creating a web API application that will take in information and generate social media posts to LinkedIn, the dawn, blue sky, then post to those. So you want to start with a very high level description of what your application is going to do. Again, you're not doing any of the technical stuff here. So, if I want this to be a .NET application, I'm not defining that here. That comes later. That's actually the next step. Here, you're just describing what the application is. You keep it, for your initial thing, you keep it very high level, and it will come up with some ideas and some thoughts around that, and plan out some things. Go ahead and minimize some of the stuff here so you can see stuff that gets created as it gets created. Okay, so let's start with that. And when you come back and you start adding like user stories, you will also use this specify command. But for the initial thing, you want to keep it very high level. So for the very first thing, we'll just go with that for our very first one. You can call this like the master user story, the overarching 10,000 foot view, however you want to do it. So, saying, okay, I'm going to create a feature specification around that. Um, was thinking that, and it's working through all that. And you can see the commands that it's running against PowerShell or Bash for using Bash as it's going through. And you'll see it actually create various things. Okay, so what you'll see is that it creates this specs folder. And each of your user stories is going to be broken out into a feature. And this one, that's just doing the initial feature here, and it creates a spec-md file. It's the very first thing that gets created. So it's still working on that. This is just the blank template. You can see here, it's this is the template that it uses to generate each of those features. We'll see what actually generates here in a second. You can also see as it's working through here, at least with the Copilot, it plans it out. It'll say, okay, here's the to-do list of the various tasks that I'm going to work through. And you can see it work through the various steps. Okay, so now it's copied over this template file and saying, okay, I'm going to read through that template. I'm going to use that to generate my actual spec.md file. And once that's done generating here, we'll take a look at what it created. As I say, you'll go through the specification process for each of the user stories that you want to create and work through. You'll find that as you're working through this, you're going to spend a lot of time waiting for your AI agent to finish the task at hand. But it's useful, and it comes up with a lot of stuff I've found that that you wouldn't have thought of. As you're gathering user requirements, it'll uh, put in things that hey, I didn't think about that piece, or I didn't think about how I might need to apply privacy standards or GDRP or whatever it might be. Okay, so here we go. All right, so feature branch 1, social post API. So this is your initial high-level branch. Gives you created data, status, draft. And we'll go through the checklist that it generates here in a second. But first thing we'll do is look at the spec.md file. And again, being Copilot, it'll summarize everything here. We're going to look through the actual files here instead of the summary that came up with. So user story 1, post to LinkedIn, priority P1, that users can submit content through the API and have it automatically posted. It gives you a why. It says, okay, here's how I'm going to be able to test that. Acceptance criteria. So it defines acceptance criteria for every user story, which is excellent. So I say, given that I have a user LinkedIn credentials, I submit a post. That post appears in the profile. When I submit a post with text and an image, it posts both the text and the image. When it's temporarily unavailable, the system returns an appropriate error message. So it thinks about things that you might not have thought about. So against the failure scenario here, I didn't put anything in the specification about failure scenario. And you can see it's pretty much created the same requirements for Mastodon and for Blue Sky. And here again, it comes up with its own ideas. Hey, here's another user story that you might not have thought of. I want to be able to post to all the platforms simultaneously, so I can put in a single request and have it post to all three. And again, it kind of defines, okay, this adds convenience, but it isn't necessarily essential for the MVP. Again, it's something that it thinks through and comes up, with that you might not have considered. Content generation assistant. Provide, this, that's something I might not want to do, and it puts it in here as a P3 priority. So, do I want AI to generate prompt or to generate posts for me? Yeah. So edge cases. So we'll come up with some ideas for edge cases based on the scenario. So, okay, what happens if credentials expire? What about special characters and emojis and non-Latin text? What if the media files are too large for a specific platform? So it comes up with these ideas of edge cases, things that you might not have thought through. And it's actually very useful very handy for coming up with those scenarios that you might not have come up with your own list of user scenarios. And then it comes up with a list of functional requirements. So, okay, here must expose the REST API, must authenticate, must support text content, support image attachments up to 10 megabytes. So it's defining these functional requirements that your technical piece is going to need. We'll get to the technical part here in a second. And it defines all this stuff and it lays it out and it puts it in here, and you have it documented and ready to go. And of course, like I say, you can make changes, you can rewrite things, you can remove things, you can add things, just do whatever you want to make updates, and it'll work with you on those. So you can either go in here and manually update the specification yourself, or you can use, if I want to make changes to it, I'll, come in here and do spec kit dot specify and, rewrite, say, okay, add this, change this, do this, and it will either, update an existing feature, or it might create a whole new feature if it thinks that it's, something completely different. Leave that for them. Let's look at these checklists that it created. So first of all, it only created the requirements checklist. These checklists that get generated are files that it will use to verify that things are completed, that things are in good shape. Here it's with requirements, it'll do things like content quality, no implementation details. So I didn't define anything I didn't put any technical stuff in the specification. That's not where the technical stuff goes. I focused on business needs. It's written for non-technical stakeholders. So somebody could come in here and look at the specification file, and they will understand what's in here. A project manager, or even if a business user comes in here and reads this, they'll be able to understand what's in this content. And it, validates that. And, all mandatory sections are completed. There's nothing left that needs clarification. So any of the requirements that it came up with, it didn't think that any of them would need further details. Success criteria are measurable. Edge cases are identified. Scope is clearly bounded. So it looks at that and it reviews that, and it says, okay, and it already went ahead and marked all these completed. But if there were things that it found in the specifications that it didn't feel were completed, it would leave those unchecked. And then, if you go in here and you're trying to implement stuff, it'll say, hey, your checklists are not all done. Are you sure you want to do this? So it actually checks these checklists to make sure that they're all completed before it works on any of the implementation stuff. So again, that's another great feature of Spec Kit that is very useful. So we've laid out our user features, our specifications, and now we want to do some technical details. So the next part is Spec Kit plan. So what plan does is it is where you will define your technical architecture and your specifications. So this will be a .NET 10 Web API application. Each social media application will exist in its own domain subfolder. We will use entity framework core and SQL Server for data storage, and Azure Blob Storage for storing image files. We will create a separate test project using XUnit version 3. What else? And the guy will use Swagger for documentation. We'll go ahead and specify C# version 14 here. We'll start with that and do that. Okay, so you can see here it is now going to scroll. There we go. Oh, that's weird because when it touches the scroll wheel and it jumps up. Okay, so speckit.plan is where you will do the technical specifications. You'll define functionality and the tool set. If there are any specific libraries that you want it to use, you can put that in here. For instance, I specified, X unit for the testing, and Entity Framework Core, SQL Server. Specified it as a .NET application, a web API application, all that kind of stuff. So let's go file that. And what we'll do is it will create a plan document. Do that here in a minute. You also see that a lot of times it has to make multiple attempts to execute the shell commands because it's almost always getting certain pieces wrong, but it figures it out. The spec kit scripts that it puts in there kind of outline what it wants it to do, but the AI agent doesn't always actually implement it well as far as the actual commands, but it figures it out on the second or third, sometimes third try. You can see here it needs to clarify a few things, so we'll get to that in a second here. So we'll see the file that it generates. And you can also see here, and we'll get to that in a second, is it's coming up with things that you didn't think about. For instance, mention of Azure Key Vault for storing credentials. And there was some mention up here of the AT protocol library, or which you'll need to post to Blue Sky and Mastodon. Okay, so it created a document called plan.md. So let's look at that one. So in this plan.md document, this is where it specifies the technical requirements of your application. So, like I said, I mentioned it as a .NET 10 C# 14 ASP Core Web API application. So it provides Swagger documentation, Entity Framework Core SQL Server. Let's get the AI generated content, but and each social platform integration, it lives in its own domain subfolder. And you'll see various notes in here, things that you might need to update and fix. So action required, place this with technical details. And you can see here there's a note needs clarification. So especially when you're first defining, if you're not very, very specific, you'll see a number of things in this plan document that needs clarification. And you can just go in here and update it. So, okay, target platform, we're going to put this on Azure App Service. So let's just go ahead and make that the clarification here. Still working. I interrupted it. Hopefully that doesn't break anything. That's still doing things. There we go. Now it's done. Okay, so you'll need to go through the document, look for things where it says needs clarification, and you can either do so if I did spec kit.plan, 100 concurrent requests. So I could do here and say, okay, this will be a single tenant application only because I'm only creating this for myself. So if I did this and I provide further details using the speckit.plan, then it will go ahead and update the the plan.md document. Do that change here in a second. And there we go. Keep. I'll go through the other files that it's created here. Sure, it's still working. Okay, now it's summarizing, so it's done. So you can see here now it's changed this from needs clarification to defining it as single tenant only. So if you need to refine it further, you can just do that speckit.plan and then provide that clarification, and it will update it. And I can do that with various things. So it also didn't. It also marked those as updated. Might not have been the best case. I might not have had it. Might not have wanted to have it define that, but those are fine. I'll leave those as is. So you can see down here through the structure. So it's documenting what the structure of the application is going to be. So it's saying, okay, here's various documentations. And here you can see got a web API with host, various domains, folders, got an application folder, infrastructure folder, common folder, utilities. And as a separate test project that will use XUnit version 3. Defines web API tests, integration tests, contract tests. And here's my specs folder. So it defines a lot of the folder structure here in this technical document as well. And also you can identify decisions. Decision documents will be part of this. So this basically is your decision document for a lot of things as far as the technical stuff goes. So if we look at some of the other stuff that it created here. So we've got a research.md file. And what this does is it's identifying points of research about the stuff that you've put in here, things that might need to be clarified further, but in this particular case, we're just identifying information about various things that you're going to need. Various decisions that were made. So this is another of your decision documents. So saying, the various decisions if using, LinkedIn version 2 REST endpoints, Mastodon, auth 2.0, post via this, statuses, and so on and so forth. So again, this research document here, quickstart.md. So this is one that will help it to help a developer who comes in, looks at this, say, okay, what do I need to get up and started? If I were to pass this on to another developer. So the developer, here's what I would need to do to set it up. But it's also defining, if a developer were doing it from scratch, but it's also what Copilot will use if I let that do the implementation here. And I'll show you that in a second as well. It's also defining a data model. So it goes out and it will, if it can find information about various things, it will get that from the various endpoints. So for instance, a post request, here's the data that's going to need to come in, validations, credentials that it might be needed, the results that might come back. So this is defining the APIs. This isn't the APIs for my social media platforms. This is the API that's going to be exposed by this application. All right, so I've got my data model. I've got this. There are contracts here. You can see it generates contracts for what the endpoints are going to be as far as what it exposes for me to use as the user. These are not the contracts for again posting the social media. And it will use that as part of the implementation phase when it goes through the implementation. Okay, so now I've got my technical details, got my user requirements. The next thing is to turn this into a set of tasks, a task list. So this would be my to-do list essentially. So we'll do Spec Kit tasks. And you don't need to pass in any parameters to that. If you want to create specific tasks or add specific tasks, you can define those there. But if you just want to go off of the plan document, the spec document, then you just do in just spec-kit.tasks, and it will create a task document. And the task document are what it will use for the implementation. Again, we'll let that run for a couple minutes and see what Copilot comes up with here. And this generally does take longer than a lot of the other things that it does. We'll give it a couple more minutes here. Up until the implementation. That takes the longest, of course, because it's writing code at that point. And what we'll do is we'll go through all this. It'll break it out into phases. And for each phase, it will come up with a list of tasks that will need to be completed in order to implement the application. So to look at, my current state, of course, I don't have anything at all here at the moment, except for my specifications. I haven't written any code, not a single line of code, and I've already defined a whole bunch of stuff about my application. And we'll take all the information, from all these various documents that it's created in order to come up with that task. And it's thinking, because Copilot likes to, all the AI agents like to think. All right, so it's generating a task.md document. Finish here before we keep and look through it. It's done. Okay, so let's take a deeper look here at this task document. So here's the task for implementing our, basically our feature one. Here's the design documents from, feature one, social post API. And saying, hey, I looked at all these documents as part of my prerequisites. Tests are optional. Not be optional, but, we can correct that. I guess, well, okay, you don't need tests for everything, but tasks. I think TDD was required, but I could go back here and look. Thought I defined TDD documentation or approach, but here. All right, so phase one is the initial setup. So phase one is, create the solution. So the first thing I need to do is create my solution. Add a couple projects to it, a web API project. I create domain libraries. So it says I'm going to come up with separate, basically class libraries for each of the domains. Application and infrastructure libraries. So it's coming up with several class libraries. It's going to add Swagger. It's going to add Energy Framework Core. It's going to add Azure Storage Blobs and add Poly for resilience. So it's going to do all that during phase one, and I'll show you how to implement stuff here in a second. If you want to do it yourself. Then phase two, okay, we've got our initial setup, so we need to start doing some infrastructure stuff. So I'm going to create some entities. I'm going to create my DB context, create some initial migrations, create a blob storage service, and so on and so forth as it lays out usually in the proper order, the tasks that need to be accomplished in order to implement the user story. And you can either start writing the code yourself, or you can let Copilot or your AI agent start writing the code. Phase three, we're still going to do posting to LinkedIn. We'll accept content and publish to LinkedIn, net content, and various things like this. So I won't go through all these. It's generating a bunch of stuff here. Let's go back here and let's say it said that TDD was not specified. So let's change that. So let's go back here to Spec Kit plan. Use a TDD approach. Test the written first. Verified to fail. Then implement code to make work. And I could go through all that, and it'll write all that, change the rules for that. And then I can come back here and I can do the task command again. So it's not perfect, of course, because AI is not perfect by any means. It does make some mistakes, but it gives you a good head start and can save you a considerable amount of time. It can also, like I say, comes up with a lot of stuff that you might not have thought of yourself. That's been the biggest thing for me is constantly find myself saying, "Oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, I didn't think about that." As it goes through and works through the requirements and comes up with especially like the edge cases stuff. Um, it's come up with the stuff I've been experimenting with. It's come up with all kinds of edge cases that I never even thought of. And as you see here, it's already added some foundational tests, and it will implement or it'll put them in where it thinks they're appropriate. So it's stuck them in here between phase 2 and phase 3. Oh, there's actually some up here under before phase 2 even. And you can see each task. So updated tests are required, TDD enforced. So keep all that. And every test has its own ID. So what you can do is you can go in here and say, let's do one for example. So very first task is T001. That didn't change over. So if I want, it to implement it itself, so you do spec-kit.implement and just do T001. And it will go ahead and start writing code. It will generate the project file or generate the source solution file first, because T001 is just the solution. And it will put it into a source subdirectory. Generate a source directory here in a second. Let's minimize those so you can see it a little bit more easily. And one of the things, if you're letting the AI agent implement stuff for you, and that's fine. Sometimes it does well, sometimes it doesn't. That's AI code. Just depends on what it's doing and what you're hoping for. One of the things I've noticed though is that maybe 10% of the time, give or take some, even when it completes a task, it doesn't mark it as done in the task file. So I've noticed that every once in a while, I'll need to go in and say, okay, review tasks and mark those completed that are complete. You can see here it's generated a source file, generating the folder structures here. It hasn't actually put anything in it yet. Still working on stuff. Now it's creating the solution file. And you can see it when it's executing commands. You can see them down here in the terminal. So up here it said .NET -- version. You can see that it ran that here. And .NET new solution file and so on and so forth. In this particular case, it did actually mark it as completed. And I'll do keep. So when it completes something, and Copilot does this, it'll say, okay, do you want me to proceed with the next task? Um, and I can just say yes, and it'll work on that. And I won't go through all that. One example's enough. But one of the things I notice, if, like I mentioned, it doesn't always mark them as complete. So if I go in speckit.tasks and say review task list and mark completed as appropriate. So I'll find that I'll have to go in here and do that every so often because it doesn't always, even though it completes a task, it doesn't always mark it as completed. And I'm not sure why that happens. Like I say, it happens maybe 10, 15% of the time, maybe not quite that much, but it does happen from time to time. And if I notice it, then I can either mark it as completed myself or I just do this. So it will automatically review and say, okay, do that. A couple of the other things here. So it's created if I go back here in the specs, so there's like these checklist files. There are various checklist files that might be created depending on what it's working on. If I were to do, speckit.implement and give it a task to work on or a group of tasks, and I could do like, T002 through and, 010, whatever. And it'll work on those specific tasks. Or I can just, do speckit.implement and it'll pick up the next batch of tasks and work on those. Or again, it asked me this question here. I could respond to that and just say yes, and it would work on 2 and 47 through 50. But if you have requirements or other checklist items that aren't complete and you tell it to implement something, it'll say, hey, these checklists aren't complete. Are you sure you want to do that? Which is fantastic because it's reviewing this stuff. It's saying, hey, do I have all of my pre-requirements been met? Have I implemented all these things? I made sure that there's nothing that needs clarification. And that's fine. And it's great that it does that. Sometimes it doesn't always update the checklist too. So you can do the same thing with checklists. So you can do speckit.checklist and do, review checklists and mark complete. That's appropriate. And it'll go through the various files in the checklist folder and figure out, hey, are these items all complete? Are the things that aren't completed? And it'll update the checklist files itself, or you can, like I said, you can update the checklist files manually if you think things are done. If you reviewed it and you think, hey, the scope is clearly bounded and this wasn't marked as done, then you can just come in here and mark it as done yourself. It's fine. So that's it. And then, from this point on, of course, you would just keep iterating. You would, each time you would want to specify a new feature, you do the spec kit /spec or specify, and you write out here's the description. Excuse me. Here's the user story. Here's the description of the new feature. Here's what I want to accomplish, and and then you go from there. And then again, after you write the feature, you do speckit.plan. So if it creates a new feature, you need to do speckit.plan, even if your technical requirements haven't changed at all. You still need to run that so that it generates the plan file. And for instance, if I get into requirement or to feature 2, feature 3, feature 4, and none of my requirements have changed, then I can just do speckit.plan. It'll take everything from the existing application, and it will actually look at the existing application as part of that plan process and say, okay, I see a .NET application. I see it's using these specific libraries. I see that it's got these various, class libraries that are part of it, and so on and so forth. And it'll implement that. So if you've added things to that, if you've added a specific library for something, it'll implement that into the plan going forward. So for additional future features, or if there's something specific that you need for a specific feature, maybe you're doing a feature with PDF exports, then you would just say, okay, speckit.plan and say for PDF exports, use this particular library, PDF Sharp or whatever. And it will use that. It will add that to the plan document for that specific feature, and it'll implement that as part of the implementation. So you don't have to respecify everything from start each time you do it. It'll take everything that's already there and reuse that, and you can just make additions. You can make changes as you go, and it's a very iterative process, and it works very well in the iteration. You saw there with the test-driven piece, it rewrote the documentation to say, okay, TDD is no longer optional; it's now required. So I'm going to update the documents, and then update the task list, and then going forward, I didn't even have to do spec kit tasks because it already knew, hey, I've changed some of my requirements. How does this affect everything that I've done so far? And we'll look at those tasks and say, okay, I need to add tasks for the tests, and it went through there and it added those tasks, and it put them in the appropriate locations, and gave them each ID identifier so you can do it going forward. And it's really fantastic how it implements that stuff. So it does a lot of stuff really, really well. Again, there's still the quirks that AI has. There's still the problems that AI has, but as far as helping you to lay out and design, implement an application, Spec Kit is absolutely fabulous. It's fantastic. It's one of the best things I think I have encountered as far as helping me as a developer, especially to do my work, as far as gathering requirements, figuring out design, figuring out task lists. That's one of the hardest things as an architect is looking at a user story and saying, okay, what are the tasks that are associated with this? How do I break this down? And this can, like I say, it comes up with a lot of stuff I might not have thought of. I wouldn't have thought of, especially around things like edge cases. And it's probably one of the best uses of AI that I have seen so far, far and above better than actual writing code. Because that I continue to be hit and miss with code writing and what AI code writes, but as far as laying out these features, and it's simple enough that a project manager or a business analyst or somebody who's like that who's gathering the user requirements can actually use this, and with a little bit of training on code, if they're not familiar with code or with using AI agents, they can use this to create all of the features, all of the task lists, figure out the requirements, figure out those checklists. They don't need to work out the technical details. They can leave that to the developer, but they can come up with all these various features and things, and be able to use this to help them in that process as well. And then they can hand it over to the developer. Okay, and the developer goes, okay, developer, now you can do the plan part. You can specify the technical documents, the technical requirements, come up with the tasks, and then start coding. So it's I think it's fantastic, and by far the best use of AI that I have seen so far. As far as the technical world goes, developer world, and it's definitely something that I would recommend you dig into. And they're moving fast, they're iterating fast, they're constantly updating it. That's why going back to the command line here, the installation, I always recommend that you run it from whenever you're running it, run it from GitHub, because don't install it locally, because you'll find that you're constantly having to update the local version. I'll always use UVX and run it from run it directly from the repo, because they are making changes constantly. They're iterating on it. They're improving the scripts. And if you go back and look at some of the early videos that were created 4 or 5 months ago, those videos are completely out of date now. Just because Spec Kit is moving so fast, it is changing so quickly. They're constantly adding to it. They're constantly improving it. And it's just one of the incredible things that's coming from the GitHub team lately. So I highly recommend it. I recommend that you go check it out and play around with it and see what it can do to help you with your work, as that goes. And I cannot recommend it enough for your time.